Have you lost your mind, Maria? How dare you put your filthy hands on my daughter? Robert Miller's voice thundered through the luxurious mansion hall, so loud that every servant stopped what they were doing. Maria, the humble maid, had only been rocking little Emily, who wouldn't stop crying. Her face flushed with shame, her heart raced, and her hands trembled. "Sir, I only wanted to soothe her. The baby was sobbing and—" "Silence." Robert cut her off sharply, pointing his finger. "I pay doctors, top-class nannies, and you, a mere maid, think you can touch my daughter? Take your hands off her immediately." It was a cruel scene. Emily, in Maria's arms, had finally stopped crying. But as Robert yanked her away harshly, the baby began to wail again, even louder. The dinner guests, Robert's wealthy and influential friends, whispered among themselves and watched with disdainful eyes. An elegant woman muttered, "These maids always forget their place." Maria wished she could vanish. Her tear-filled eyes revealed the pain of humiliation, but out of respect and necessity, she stayed silent. Emily stretched her tiny arms toward her, but Robert ignored it, attempting to hand the child over to the official nanny, who stood frozen, unsure of what to do. "If I ever see you touching my daughter again—" Robert leaned closer, lowering his voice, but every word dripped with venom. "It will be your last day in this house." Maria lowered her head, swallowing hard, feeling the full weight of injustice. Yet deep inside, something told her this story was only just beginning. The hall was still full of whispered voices when Robert, furious, lifted his chin and, in an authoritative tone, commanded everyone's attention. "I want you all to know that in my house there is order. I do not allow servants to cross boundaries. Everyone here must know their place." The silence was cutting. The guests exchanged glances, some approving, others simply uncomfortable with the scene. Maria, her eyes filled with tears, kept her head lowered. Shame burned on her skin like fire. Emily's stepmother, Vivian, approached with her cold smile. She always made sure to remind everyone that she was the lady of the mansion. Placing her hand on her husband's shoulder, she added, "Robert, you're right. These simple people so easily forget who they are. They think they can get too close, as if they were part of the family. That isn't healthy." The whispers grew louder. Some wealthy women of high society agreed with Vivian, fanning their expensive fans as if watching a theater performance. Humiliated, Maria stepped back. She tried to defend herself, but her voice came out faint. "I never meant any disrespect, ma'am. The baby was crying so much I only wanted—" Vivian interrupted her with disdain. "Enough! What you wanted was to take advantage of this household's kindness. I've seen this kind of behavior before. They start by rocking the baby and then they think they're indispensable. It's always the same story." The laughter of some guests pierced Maria's heart. Her eyes stung, but she forced herself not to let the tears fall there in front of everyone. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Robert drew a deep breath, as if to close the matter. "Maria, consider yourself warned. One more move like that and you'll be out on the street." He turned away, ignoring the maid's pleading gaze, and handed his daughter back to the nanny. But Emily, inconsolable, cried even harder, stretching her little arms toward Maria, who was now being discreetly led by another servant toward the kitchen. Each of Maria's steps felt like a burden on her back. Her heart bled not only from the humiliation, but from the injustice of being treated as if she were unclean, as if her love and care were unworthy. Back in the hall, Vivian murmured into her husband's ear, "You need to fire her soon. That woman is going to be a problem." Robert did not reply, but the hardened expression on his face showed that the humiliation was far from over. The heavy kitchen door closed behind her with a faint creak. Inside, the clinking of silverware and pans felt distant compared to the weight crushing Maria's chest. She leaned against the cold wall, took a deep breath, and finally let the tears fall. Her hands, still carrying the warmth of little Emily's tiny body, were trembling. "Why, Lord? Why do I deserve so much contempt? I just wanted to help that child," she whispered through sobs. Maria was a black woman, born humble, raised in hardship, Since her teenage years, she had worked in wealthy homes, always swallowing humiliation in silence because she had no choice. The kitchen was supposed to be her safe space, but even there the air felt heavy. She grabbed a dish towel, quickly wiping her tears, trying to compose herself. Other servants looked at her with pity but also with fear. "Stay strong, Maria," murmured Anna, the older cook, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "I know it wasn't fair, but you know how it is. We can't talk back." Maria nodded, unable to reply. Deep down, Anna was right. In that mansion, the master's word was law. Speaking up could cost her everything, but losing this job wasn't an option. Maria thought of her teenage daughter back home in the poor neighborhood. Every dollar she earned was to put food on the table, pay for school, and give her girl a better future. That was why she endured it all. Suddenly, a loud cry pierced through the walls. Emily. Even from afar, Maria would recognize that cry anywhere. Her heart clenched. "She won't stop crying," Maria whispered almost to herself. "I know because I've held that kind of despair in my arms before." The cook glanced at her with sorrow but said nothing. Everyone knew there was something unusual, almost mysterious in the bond between Maria and the baby. Whenever Emily was with her, she calmed down instantly. With anyone else, the child cried endlessly. Maria closed her eyes, breathing deeply. She felt it wasn't just maternal instinct or affection. There was something deeper, almost divine, tying her to that little girl. But for now, all she could do was swallow her pain and pray. "Lord, don't let me break. I need this job, but I need your strength even more to endure." While she wiped her tears in silence, the dining hall echoed with Vivian's insistent voice. She was pushing Robert to fire the maid immediately. He hesitated. But in Maria's heart, quietly, a certainty began to grow. This story was far from over. The mansion was restless that night. Emily's cries echoed down the grand hallways, bouncing off the marble walls and chandeliers. Vivian paced angrily in the nursery, her silk robe swishing with every impatient step. "Why won't she stop crying?" Vivian snapped at the professional nanny, who looked exhausted and helpless. "I don't know, ma'am. I've tried everything, feeding her, rocking her, singing. Nothing works." Vivian rolled her eyes, her patience running thin. She had always disliked noise, and the constant wailing of her stepdaughter was driving her insane. Robert entered the nursery, his face tense, his tie loosened after the disastrous dinner. He reached for the baby, trying to calm her himself, but Emily only screamed louder in his arms. "For heaven's sake," Robert muttered, bouncing the child awkwardly. "What's wrong with her?" The nanny hesitated before speaking. "Sir, forgive me, but the truth is, the baby only calms down when Maria holds her." The words cut through the room like a blade. Vivian froze, her eyes narrowing in fury. "What did you say?" she hissed. "Are you suggesting that my husband's daughter prefers the maid to her own family?" The nanny stammered, terrified. I'm only saying what I've observed, ma'am." Robert frowned, his pride wounded. The idea that his child would only find comfort with a servant was unbearable. He wanted to reject it immediately, but Emily's cries grew so piercing that his frustration turned into desperation. "Bring her," Robert ordered coldly. Maria was summoned from the kitchen, still red-eyed from crying. She entered the nursery cautiously, her heart pounding. The moment Emily saw her, the baby's cries turned into whimpers, and the tiny arms reached out desperately toward her. Maria's lips trembled. She glanced at Robert, unsure if she had permission to approach. "Well, take her then," Robert barked, frustrated. As soon as Maria held Emily against her chest, the child quieted instantly, her breathing slowing, her little hand clinging to Maria's uniform. The room fell into an eerie silence. Robert and Vivian stared in disbelief. The nanny lowered her eyes, almost relieved that the nightmare of endless crying had ended. Vivian's face burned with rage. "This is absurd. She's just a servant. Emily's only calm because Maria spoils her, that's all." Maria swallowed hard, her eyes fixed on the baby's peaceful face. She didn't dare argue, but deep inside, she felt the truth. There was a bond between her and this child that went beyond logic, beyond class, beyond bloodlines, or maybe not beyond bloodlines at all. Robert, however, couldn't hide the crack forming in his pride. Watching Emily's fragile face nestled against the chest of a woman he had just humiliated stirred something deep within him, something uncomfortable. But before that thought could settle, Vivian's cold voice cut through. "Robert, we need to put an end to this nonsense. If Emily only wants Maria, then she's manipulating us. This woman is becoming too important in this house. We can't allow it." Maria lowered her head again, as if her silence could shield her from the daggers in Vivian's eyes. But she felt Emily's tiny heartbeat against hers, and a quiet certainty grew inside her. This connection wasn't wrong. It was destiny. That night, while Robert wrestled with confusion and Vivian plotted with jealousy, Maria whispered a silent prayer over the sleeping child in her arms. "Lord, protect this little one, and if there is truth to what I feel, let it come to light in your time." The baby stirred softly, clinging even tighter to her blouse as if heaven itself were answering that prayer. The following morning, the mansion carried an air of uneasy silence. The storm of the previous night still lingered, though no one dared to speak of it openly. Servants walked quietly, their eyes lowered, while the memory of Robert's anger and Vivian's cutting words hung heavy in the air. Maria rose early, as she always did. Her uniform was neatly pressed, though her eyes still bore the shadows of sleeplessness. She had spent most of the night praying and thinking about Emily, about the way the baby clung to her, as though her tiny life depended on it. As she polished the silver in the dining room, Vivian entered with her usual commanding presence. Draped in a silk robe, her hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour, she eyed Maria like a predator eyeing its prey. "So," Vivian began, her voice dripping with disdain, "the house is buzzing with stories about last night. It seems our maid believes she is the only one capable of caring for my stepdaughter." Maria froze, clutching the cloth in her hand. She did not look up. "Mrs. Vivian," she said softly, "I never claimed that. I only—" "Enough!" Vivian snapped, her words sharp as glass. "Don't pretend to be innocent. I see the way Emily clings to you. It's unnatural. You're turning her against me, against her own family. You're poisoning her." Maria's heart clenched. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but before she could speak, Vivian stepped closer, her eyes burning with fury. "Do not think for 1 second that you are special. You are nothing more than a servant. A poor black woman hired to clean floors and polish silver. If Emily cries in your arms, it is because she does not know any better. And if you continue to encourage it, I will personally make sure you never work in this city again." The words struck like whips. Maria lowered her gaze, not out of guilt, but because the weight of humiliation was too heavy. She bit her lip, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. She could not let Vivian see her break. At that moment, Robert entered the room. His presence was commanding, his tall figure casting a shadow across the dining hall. He looked first at his wife, then at Maria. "What's going on here?" he asked sternly. Vivian straightened immediately, her voice turning sweet and polished. "Nothing, darling. I was only reminding Maria of her duties. You know how these people sometimes forget themselves." Robert's eyes flickered with something unreadable. For a moment, it almost seemed as though he felt uncomfortable with his wife's words, but he quickly masked it with his usual sternness. "Maria," he said coldly, "do your work and stay out of matters that do not concern you." Maria bowed her head respectfully. "Yes, sir." Vivian smirked, triumphant. She looped her arm around her husband's, guiding him away as though she had won a battle. But Maria, left alone in the dining room, could not ignore the ache inside her chest. She returned to polishing the silver, her hands steady though her heart trembled. She whispered under her breath, "Lord, give me strength. If they despise me for loving that child, then let me endure it, because I know deep down you have a purpose for this bond." And though the mansion seemed filled with contempt and envy, Maria felt a quiet conviction stirring within her soul. No amount of hatred from Vivian could sever the mysterious tie between her and Emily. Days passed, but the tension in the mansion only grew heavier. Vivian's jealousy festered like a wound, her cold remarks toward Maria sharper with each passing moment. Robert, though outwardly composed, carried an unease he couldn't quite explain. Every time he saw his daughter reach for the maid instead of him, something inside him twisted. Maria endured it all in silence. She focused on her work, her prayers, and the quiet moments when she was allowed to hold Emily. In those moments she felt whole, as if the world's cruelty faded away, leaving only the warmth of the child's heartbeat pressed against her chest. But the house itself seemed to whisper of secrets. In the library, Robert often lingered late into the night, poring over old documents, letters, and records. He never told Vivian what he was searching for, but shadows lingered under his eyes, betraying restless nights. One evening, as a storm rolled across the city, Robert unlocked a drawer in his private study. Inside lay a small, faded envelope, sealed with wax. His hands trembled as he broke it open, revealing a letter that had been hidden for years. The letter was from his late first wife, Emily's mother. Her delicate handwriting, though faded, carried the weight of confession. "Robert, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to explain. There is something you must know about our daughter, something I kept from you out of fear. The day Emily was born, complications arose. She was so weak I feared she would not survive. But by God's mercy she lived. Yet in those desperate hours, there was another child. A child born under the same roof. One who shared her blood in ways you could never imagine." Robert's eyes widened. His breath caught as he scanned the page, but the ink had blurred with age, leaving the rest of the words nearly illegible. He clenched the paper, his heart pounding. "Another child?" he whispered, his voice shaking. Just then, a knock on the door startled him. He shoved the letter back into the drawer, locking it quickly. It was Vivian, her smile sharp as a knife. "Still buried in your books?" she teased, stepping inside. "Come to bed, Robert. You'll drive yourself mad with all this brooding." Robert forced a smile, but his mind was elsewhere. The fragment of that letter haunted him, raising questions he had never dared to ask. Meanwhile, in her small quarters, Maria knelt beside her bed, praying quietly as thunder rumbled outside. Her heart felt restless, as though God himself was preparing her for something beyond her understanding. She pressed her hands together, whispering through tears, "Lord, if there is a truth buried in this house, let it be revealed. Not for me, but for the sake of that innocent child." And as the storm raged on, two souls, one broken by pride, the other by injustice, stood unknowingly on the edge of a revelation that would change their lives forever. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the mansion, but there was no warmth in the air. Robert hadn't slept. The letter he had discovered weighed heavily on his mind, its words echoing over and over. Another child. Shared her blood. He couldn't shake the thought. Every time he looked at Emily, and every time he saw the way she clung to Maria, his chest tightened. Could there be more to their bond than mere coincidence? That day, as if led by invisible hands, Robert found himself in the storage room at the back of the mansion. Dusty boxes lined the shelves, filled with old hospital papers, photographs, and documents his first wife had kept. His hands trembled as he pulled out a folder marked with the year of Emily's birth. Inside, faded medical notes confirmed what the letter had hinted. The night Emily was born, there had been complications. But the file contained something more, an adoption record. His eyes scanned the page, heart racing. Infant transferred. Biological mother unable to provide. Placed under care of Maria Johnson. The name struck him like a thunderclap. "Maria," he whispered, his voice breaking. He staggered back, clutching the paper. The room seemed to spin. It was true. His late wife, in her desperation, had allowed another baby, Maria's baby, to be brought into the same hospital ward. And in the chaos of that night, the truth had been buried. The connection between Emily and Maria was not just affection. It was blood. Robert's knees weakened. He sat heavily on an old chair, the weight of guilt crushing him. Dear God, what have I done? Just then the door creaked open. Maria stood there holding Emily in her arms. She had been summoned by the nanny after the baby's cries refused to stop. The sight froze Robert. The papers still shook in his hand. His eyes darted from Maria to the child, then back again. For the first time he truly saw them, saw the resemblance he had ignored, the tenderness that had always been there. Sir, Maria began nervously, her voice soft. I'm sorry to intrude, but Emily wouldn't calm down. She needed me. Her words faltered as she noticed his pale face, his trembling hands. Robert rose slowly, the paper clutched to his chest. He stared at Maria, his eyes wet with something she had never seen in him before. Vulnerability. Maria, his voice cracked. Tell me, the night your daughter was born, what happened? Maria froze, clutching Emily tighter. Memories she had buried for years surged back. The hospital, the pain, the confusion, the moment her newborn was taken from her arms with promises that she would be safe. Her lips trembled. She had never spoken of it, not to anyone. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, I lost her. Or at least that's what they told me. They said she was gone. Robert's breath caught. He held out the papers with a shaking hand. Maria, she wasn't gone. The room fell into a silence so heavy it felt sacred. Maria stared at the documents, then at Emily. Her knees buckled as the truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. Emily, sweet, innocent Emily, was not just the child she cared for. She was her daughter. The great hall of the mansion gleamed under the golden chandeliers. Guests had gathered once again. Robert had organized a business reception, determined to maintain his image as the flawless, untouchable billionaire. Vivian, draped in her jewels and arrogance, moved gracefully among them, her false smile hiding the storm brewing beneath her pride. But that evening, something was different. Robert's face was grave, his posture heavy. He had summoned Maria to stand before the crowd, a decision that sent whispers rippling through the room. Maria entered hesitantly, Emily resting peacefully in her arms. The eyes of the wealthy pierced her like knives, disdainful, curious, judgmental. Vivian smirked coldly, certain her husband was finally going to dismiss the maid in front of everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Robert's voice thundered, silencing the hall. I must speak of something personal, something that can no longer remain hidden. Vivian's eyes widened. This was not the speech she expected. Robert took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on Maria. In his hand he held the documents he had unearthed, the truth that had shattered him. For weeks I questioned why my daughter Emily only found peace in the arms of this woman, why she clung to her as though her very life depended on it. I thought it was weakness. I thought it was disobedience. I even shamed her. His voice broke, and for the first time in years Robert's mask of pride cracked before the world. The guests exchanged shocked glances, a billionaire trembling with emotion. Vivian stepped forward, her voice dripping with venom. Robert, what are you doing? This is madness. Do not humiliate yourself over a servant. Silence, Vivian, Robert roared, his voice echoing through the hall. The crowd gasped. Vivian froze, her face flushed with rage and disbelief. Robert turned back to Maria, his eyes wet. Maria Johnson, you are not just a servant in this house. The truth I discovered is that Emily is not only my daughter, she is yours. A stunned silence fell over the hall. Gasps, murmurs, even cries of disbelief rippled through the crowd. Maria staggered back, clutching Emily tighter, her heart racing. What? What are you saying? She whispered, tears filling her eyes. Robert stepped closer, holding out the documents with trembling hands. The night Emily was born, your child was taken from you under lies. She was never gone, Maria. She is here. The baby you mourned is the very child you have held and loved all along. The hall erupted into chaos. Vivian shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. Lies, all lies. She is trying to steal my place. But the proof in Robert's hand silenced even the harshest whispers. The guests, who once sneered at Maria, now stared in awe and shock. Maria's knees buckled and she fell to the floor sobbing, pressing Emily to her chest. Her voice trembled as she cried out, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for bringing my baby back to me." Robert bent down beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Tears streamed down his face as he whispered, "Forgive me, Maria. Forgive every cruel word, every humiliation. I was blind, but God has opened my eyes." And before the eyes of the powerful and the proud, the billionaire who once shouted at the maid now bowed his head, broken and repentant, while Maria held her daughter in the embrace she thought she had lost forever. The great hall, once filled with arrogance and laughter, had become a sacred place of revelation, where the truth no wealth could bury had finally come to light. The hall remained frozen in shock. The murmurs of the wealthy guests, once filled with contempt toward Maria, now hushed into silence. All eyes were on Robert Miller, the man who built empires, who commanded boardrooms with an iron fist, who never bent to anyone. And yet here he was, kneeling before a black maid, his eyes red, his voice trembling. Robert clutched the papers in one hand, but they slipped from his grasp, scattering across the polished marble floor. He didn't care. His gaze was fixed only on Emily, resting in Maria's trembling arms, and the undeniable truth that had shattered his pride. "All my life," Robert began, his voice low but heavy, "I thought power, money, and control were what made a man strong. But in this moment I realize I was nothing but blind." His lips trembled. His hand rose to his face, and before the astonished eyes of everyone present, a single tear slid down his cheek. The tear of Robert Miller, the man who had been called ruthless, untouchable, unshakable, was enough to silence the entire hall. Maria gasped softly, her own heart breaking at the sight. She had prayed for justice, for dignity, but she had never imagined this. The proud billionaire humbled before her, undone by the truth. Vivian, however, could not bear it. "Robert, get up! You are humiliating yourself!" she cried, her voice shrill with panic. "Don't you see? She's manipulating you. She's just a servant." "Enough!" Robert roared, turning on her with a fury that shook the room. His voice carried the weight of finality. "Do not call her just a servant. She is Emily's mother. She is the woman who has shown more love and devotion than anyone else in this house. While you cared only for appearances, for your place in society, Maria cared for my daughter's soul." Vivian's face drained of color. She stepped back, trembling, realizing her grip on the mansion and on Robert was slipping away. Robert turned back to Maria, his voice breaking again. "Maria, I screamed at you. I shamed you. I called your love dirty. And yet you never stopped caring for Emily. You never turned away. You loved her even when I denied you the right to. What kind of man does that make me?" Maria shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. "A man who is learning," she whispered softly. "A man who still has the chance to make things right." The words struck Robert like a balm. For the first time he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not control, but grace. He bowed his head, his tears falling freely now. "Then may God forgive me, Maria, as I beg you to forgive me too." And in that sacred moment, the most powerful man in the city wept, not for lost deals or fading wealth, but for the years of pride that had blinded him to the truth that stood before him. The guests who had once mocked Maria now lowered their eyes in shame, unable to meet hers. For in that hall they all witnessed the power of truth, of love, and of a God who never abandons the humble. The mansion that once echoed with arrogance now felt transformed. The grand hall, filled with chandeliers and polished marble, had become a silent witness to something greater than wealth. Truth. Maria, still holding Emily close, slowly rose to her feet. Her hands trembled, but her eyes glowed with a strength she had not felt in years. Around her, the wealthy guests who once sneered at her now bowed their heads, unable to hide their shame. Robert stood beside her, no longer the untouchable billionaire, but a broken man humbled by revelation. His voice was steady, though thick with emotion. From this day forward, Maria is not just an employee in this house. She is family. She is Emily's rightful mother, and she will never again be treated with disrespect under my roof. A murmur swept through the crowd, but none dared challenge him. The man who once lived for reputation no longer cared for whispers. For the first time, Robert's words carried not pride, but truth. Vivian's face twisted with rage. "You can't do this, Robert. You'll ruin us. Don't you see how ridiculous this is? A servant, a poor black woman, elevated to—" But Robert cut her off with a glare so fierce that her words withered on her lips. "Be silent, Vivian. You showed no love for my daughter. You showed only envy and cruelty. This house has no place for such poison anymore." Vivian gasped, realizing her power had crumbled. With her pride shattered and her schemes exposed, she fled the hall, her footsteps echoing like the end of an era. Maria, overwhelmed, whispered softly, "I never sought this. I only wanted to care for Emily. I never imagined God would return her to me." Robert placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "It was never chance, Maria. It was providence. God himself brought you back to your daughter, and me back to my humanity." Tears filled Maria's eyes as she kissed Emily's forehead, whispering a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, Lord, for justice. Thank you for not abandoning the humble." The guests, moved beyond words, began to applaud softly. Not for Robert, not for wealth, but for the triumph of truth over lies, of love over pride. From that day the mansion changed. Maria was no longer the invisible maid. She was recognized as Emily's true mother, her place in the household secured not by charity but by blood and divine justice. Robert, once feared as a ruthless man, began to change. He spent less time in boardrooms and more time with his daughter, and though his fortune remained vast, his heart now carried something far more valuable: humility. As for Maria, she walked through the mansion no longer bowed by shame, but lifted by dignity. She had endured humiliation, cruelty and injustice, but in the end the truth had set her free. And so it was that in the very place where she was once told, "Take your filthy hands off my daughter," Maria now held Emily openly, proudly, with no one daring to challenge her. Because the world had seen it. She was not just the servant. She was the mother.